Single mother, abandoned by her ex, takes a drunk millionaire home without knowing he would kiss her when the rain poured down with a fury that blurred the world beyond her windshield. When she spotted the body lying on the side of the cracked asphalt road, she slammed the brakes. The man's suit was drenched, his body still, his face hidden beneath the hood of his coat. She froze, but there was no one else around. Not a car, not a light, not even the hum of another engine. Just her, the storm, and the bitter cold pressing through the glass. When he opened his eyes later in the back seat, mumbling words that made no sense, she couldn't imagine that just a few hours later, his lips would find hers, right beside her sleeping daughter's crib. She didn't expect much from life anymore. The father of her child had vanished before the birth, leaving only debts, broken promises, and a name she refused to say aloud. She lived in a small guest house behind a narrow duplex, worked double shifts as a waitress, and dreamed of one single luxury, peace. But the man she picked up wasn't just anyone. It was him, the most feared businessman in New York, the heir to a fortune built on lawsuits, scandals, and quiet disappearances. Cold, sarcastic, always surrounded by bodyguards. He was both a legend and a warning. Yet tonight he was just a broken man, shattered inside and out. And for the first time, someone saw him that way, without the armor. If stories like this make your pulse race, hit subscribe to hear more true tales of heartbeats and second chances. The rain drummed hard on the roof of her old, white Honda Civic. Zelinda Mora gripped the steering wheel tight, her knuckles pale with tension. The narrow back road was slick with water, dangerous even in daylight. Every bump made the car groan, and she whispered small prayers that the engine wouldn't give out. Not now, not here, in the middle of nowhere. Listener, her 2-year-old, slept in the back seat, strapped into a worn-out car seat whose buckles had seen better days. At only 2 years old, the little girl already knew more silence than laughter. Zelinda checked the rearview mirror, her daughter's tiny curls stuck to her forehead, her little chest rising and falling peacefully. That was all that mattered. The restaurant shift had been brutal, 6 hours on her feet, serving overpriced dishes to people who never even looked her in the eye. Few tips, fake smiles, and jokes she had to pretend not to understand. But it paid the bills, barely. When her headlights cut through the rain and caught the outline of a body on the roadside, she gasped and slammed the brakes. The car skidded before stopping, her pulse hammered. A man, lying motionless. For a moment she thought about driving on. It wasn't safe to stop, it wasn't smart to get involved. But something older than fear made her open the door. Maybe it was the memory of when she herself had been the one left behind. Or maybe it was knowing that walking away from someone in danger meant losing a piece of herself. Within seconds she was soaked. She ran to him, kneeling on the wet ground. The sharp smell of whiskey hit her hard. He was alive, breathing heavily, but unconscious. His suit was expensive, Italian fabric, perfect tailoring, even drenched in rain. His hands were large, long-fingered, manicured, definitely not someone from her side of town. Hey sir, she said, shaking his shoulder, feeling the hard muscle under his jacket. Wake up, please wake up. He mumbled something, eyes flickering under his closed lids. Zelinda looked around. No cars, no houses. Just darkness and the slicing wind of a New York storm. She couldn't leave him there. With effort she dragged him to the car. He was tall, muscular, heavy, every inch of him a challenge. She opened the back door opposite her daughter's seat, and using strength she didn't know she had, pushed him inside. His body slumped across the seat, his head hanging loosely to one side. Back in the driver's seat, she pulled off her soaked jacket and tossed it to the floor. Her hands trembled, maybe from cold, maybe from nerves. She checked the mirror. Listen, still slept soundly. Beside her a stranger, motionless. What am I doing? she whispered, wiping her face with the back of her hand. But it was done. She started the car and drove on, her heart racing, her mind scrambling for what to do next. Hospital? Police? Taking him home was insane. But what if he needed immediate help? What if he'd been attacked or robbed? Every few minutes, she checked the rearview mirror. The man remained still, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. When she reached her neighborhood, a row of small houses with low fences and narrow streets, she parked in front of the small studio she rented behind Mrs. Darlene's house. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment, staring at the dashboard. The rain had softened to a mist. She exhaled slowly. She had to get him out of the car, somewhere safe, until she figured out what to do. Opening the back door, she grabbed him by the arms. He was even heavier than before. His shoes dragged through puddles as she pulled him inch by inch to the door. Holding the key between her teeth, she managed to unlock it and push him inside, collapsing him onto a small couch. He landed hard, one arm hanging, his head tilting back. Zelinda stood over him, chest heaving, her arms burning from the effort. Under the yellow light of the single bulb, she finally saw his face. He was beautiful, strikingly so. A sharp jaw, perfectly trimmed beard, full lips, straight nose. But beneath that perfection was something else, an old sadness carved into the lines around his eyes. Zelinda shook her head. This wasn't the time to stare. She went to get her daughter, still asleep, and placed her in the crib in the next room, a makeshift bed covered with the crochet blanket her mother had made years ago. She kissed the child's forehead, breathing in the scent of milk and baby powder. When she returned to the living room, the man had shifted slightly, turning on his side, one arm covering his face as if to block something invisible. Zelinda grabbed a towel and gently wiped his face. His skin was cold. She fetched a blanket, covered him, and went to make tea. As the kettle began to whistle, she leaned against the sink, eyes closed. Exhaustion weighed like stone in her chest. She couldn't sleep, not with a stranger in her house. She sat back in the rocking chair that creaked with every motion, tea in hand. The sound of the rain outside, the ticking of the wall clock, and the breathing of the man who, for reasons she didn't yet understand, had already changed something in her quiet, tired world. Hours later, just as the first light crept through the blinds, he opened his eyes. Alden Sorrow woke up with the crushing feeling that the world had collapsed on his head. The dim light spilling through the small window stabbed at his eyes like blades. He blinked several times, trying to focus. Where was he? The ceiling was low, stained with moisture. The walls were painted a faded yellow, and the air smelled of dust, mixed with something faintly sweet. Baby powder. He tried to sit up, but his body protested. Every muscle ached. His head throbbed as if someone were hammering from the inside. He pressed a hand to his forehead, feeling cold sweat. That's when he saw her. She was sitting in a rocking chair, eyes closed, her head tilted to the side, asleep, but tense, as if her body was ready to spring awake at any second. Alden watched her quietly. She was young, maybe 30, with dark hair pulled into a loose bun, a plain white t-shirt, worn-out jeans. Her hands rested on her lap, palms rough and calloused. Where? His voice came out dry and cracked. Zelinda's eyes snapped open. Her body stiffened. For a second, they just stared at each other, her with caution, him with confusion. "You're awake," she said softly, standing up slowly but keeping her distance. "How do you feel?" Alden rubbed his face, trying to gather his thoughts. Fragments of the previous night flashed through his mind. The boardroom argument, Magali's poisonous words, the bottle of whiskey, the stupid decision to drive, the storm, and then, nothing. What happened? He looked around again, searching for clues. "Where am I?" "You're at my place." Zelinda crossed her arms, her voice firm but not unfriendly. "I found you passed out on the side of the road. There was no one else around, so I brought you here." He stared at her, processing. She had helped him, a stranger. Why? He tried to stand but wavered, dizzy. Zelinda stepped forward, but he raised his hand to stop her. Sorry, you shouldn't have had to. You didn't need to do that. Nobody needs to do anything, she said, shrugging. But I did. If you can sit up, I'll make some coffee. You look like you could use it. He nodded silently. There was something disarming about her. No judgment, no curiosity, just kindness. While Zelinda moved into the tiny kitchen, Alden managed to sit properly on the couch. He looked down at himself. His tailored suit was wrinkled and stained with mud. The watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe worth more than this entire apartment, still ticked faithfully. 6:15 in the morning. He should have been home or in his penthouse office. Anywhere but here. Yet, strangely, he didn't feel like leaving. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room, and his stomach twisted, not from nausea, but hunger. When had he last eaten? He couldn't remember. Zelinda returned, holding 2 mismatched mugs. She handed him one, the cheap porcelain warm against his palms. He took a sip. It was strong, bitter, perfect. Thank you, he murmured, and this time it sounded genuine. Zelinda sat back in the rocking chair, her own mug cradled between her hands. For a while neither spoke, only the soft clink of mugs and a faint sound of morning birds outside. I'm Alden, he said finally, realizing she hadn't even asked. Zelinda. He repeated her name, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. Do you live here alone? That's when they heard it, a soft whimper coming from the next room. Zelinda immediately stood, placing her mug on the table. No, I have a daughter, she said, and disappeared through the doorway. Alden stayed where he was, processing the new piece of information. A daughter. His gaze wandered across the room, a stuffed bunny in the corner, a small pile of diapers, folded neatly on a chair, a faint smell of milk and powder. Moments later, Zelinda returned, a small girl perched on her hip. The child blinked at him with wide, sleepy eyes, clutching a blue blanket. She stared, curious but unafraid. This is Listener, Zelinda said, adjusting the little one's weight. Hey, listen here, Alden said softly. The girl hid her face in her mother's neck. Zelinda smiled for the first time, and something unfamiliar tightened in his chest. It wasn't attraction, not exactly. It was recognition, the quiet warmth of something he hadn't felt in years. Home. I should go, Alden said suddenly, standing too fast. He swayed but steadied himself. Sorry for the trouble. And thank you, really. Are you sure you're okay to leave? Zelinda asked, her eyes full of genuine concern. He hesitated. No, he wasn't okay, but he couldn't stay. Not here, not with her, because for the first time in years, he wanted to stay, and that terrified him. I'll be fine. He walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Zelinda stood there holding her daughter, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes that seemed to see right through him. If you ever need anything, she began, but he shook his head. You've already done enough. He opened the door. The morning air was cold, the sky still heavy with clouds. As he stepped outside, drawing a deep breath, he knew something inside him had shifted, something he couldn't name, but couldn't ignore either. And somewhere down the street, a quiet lens had already caught every second of it. If stories like this make your heart race, subscribe now for more tailies that will keep you holding your breath. 3 hours later, Zelinda found out who he really was. She was in the kitchen stirring oatmeal for Listener when her phone buzzed on the counter, a news alert. Normally she'd ignore it, but the name caught her eye. Alden Serow reported missing after explosive board meeting. Her heart skipped. She tapped the headline, scanning the article. Business magnate, heir to $1 billion empire, known for his ruthless tactics, respected and feared in equal measure, and according to the report, he had vanished the previous night after a heated argument with members of his company's board. The photo didn't match the memory Zelinda carried. In the picture, Alden Sorrow wore a flawless suit, his face sharp, composed, his eyes cold, unflinching toward the camera. There was none of the vulnerability she'd seen that morning. "Oh my God," Jalinda whispered, sinking into the chair. She kept reading. The articles speculated about his whereabouts, ex-relationships, ruthless business deals, even possible enemies. And then, at the bottom, one final line. Anonymous sources claimed the businessman was last seen in a working-class neighborhood on the west side. Investigation ongoing. A chill ran through her spine. Someone had seen them, taken a photo. She looked over at Lisanne here, who sat on the floor, playing with plastic cups, blissfully unaware. The phone buzzed again. This time, a call. Unknown number. Zalinda hesitated, then answered. "Hello, Miss Mura." The voice was male, deep, polite, professional. "Who's asking?" "My name's Irwin, personal assistant to Mr. Alden Sorrow. He'd like to speak with you. Could you please share your address?" Zalinda froze. How did he get her number? How did he know her name? I don't know what you're talking about," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Miss Mura, please. There's nothing to be alarmed about. Mr. Sorrow only wishes to thank you in person, and, if I may, to settle a situation before it becomes ... complicated." "What situation?" There was a pause on the line. She heard a door close, like the man had moved somewhere more private. "The press, ma'am. They already know he spent the night at your home. Reporters will be there soon. And, if I'm being honest, that won't be pleasant for you or your daughter." Panic climbed her throat. "The press, our house. Listen, what does he want?" "To help you. If you give me your address, I'll send a car in about 30 minutes. Zalinda looked around her tiny home, the peeling paint, the leaky roof, the worn furniture. Everything she owned could fit into 2 suitcases, maybe 3, counting Lysenia's toys. "Fine," she said quietly, and gave the address. 28 minutes later, a black Mercedes-Benz stopped in front of the house. Zalinda had already packed the essentials: clothes, documents, Lysenia's favorite stuffed rabbit. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay. The driver, a middle-aged man with a posture that screamed former military, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Inside, there was already a child's car seat. Someone had thought ahead. The ride was silent. Zalinda watched through the window as the scenery shifted, small homes fading into apartment blocks, then gated neighborhoods, and finally, sprawling mansions. The car passed through an automatic gate, followed a driveway lined with tall palm trees, and stopped in front of a house that looked more like a boutique hotel. Alden was waiting at the entrance. He had showered and changed, now in a white linen shirt and dark trousers. His hair was damp, slicked back. He looked like someone else. Or maybe, she thought, this was the real version, the man the world saw. "Zalinda," he said, stepping down the stairs, hands in his pockets. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have much of a choice," she replied, lifting her from the car. The little girl's eyes were wide, her lips parted in awe. "I know, and I'm sorry for that." His voice was calm, sincere. "But I needed to get you both out of there before things got ugly, and this is better." Zalinda glanced up at the mansion towering above them. She felt impossibly small. "It's safe," he said simply, and there was something in his tone, a quiet certainty, that made her believe him. He led them inside. The house was vast, with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, but strangely, it didn't feel cold. There were plants in oversized pots, soft natural light filtering through tall windows, and the faint smell of coffee and polished wood. "I've prepared a room for you," Alden said, as they climbed the grand staircase. "It has everything you might need. If there's anything missing, just ask." He opened a door, revealing a spacious room, king-sized bed, a brand-new wooden crib, a nursing chair, and shelves filled with children's books. Zalinda froze in the doorway, speechless. She began, but words failed her. "I just want to help," Alden said softly. That same rawness she'd seen on the roadside flickered again in his eyes. "You helped me when I didn't deserve it. Let me return the favor." Zelinda looked at Lysania, then back at him. There were 1,000 reasons to say no, to grab her daughter and run. But there was something in his voice, in this place, that made her want to stay. "All right," she said finally, "but only until things calm down." Alden nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "As long as you need." And Zelinda stepped into the room, holding her daughter close. She didn't realize that "as long as you need" would stretch far longer than either of them expected. The first few days in the mansion felt surreal. Zelinda moved through the halls like a ghost, half expecting someone to tell her it was a mistake, but no one did. The staff were discreet, kind, especially with Listen, who had already stolen everyone's attention. Alden, however, was a quiet constant. He worked from home, locked in his office most of the day, but always joined them for dinner. And every evening he'd ask how Listener had slept, if Zelinda needed anything, if she was settling in. It was on the 5th night that everything changed. Zelinda couldn't sleep. Listener had finally dozed off after a long, tearful night, teething pains. The house was silent. She slipped out of bed, barefoot, and went downstairs for a glass of water. That's where she heard it, a low, broken sound, coming from the office. She hesitated, hand on the kitchen door handle. It wasn't her business. But the sound came again, louder this time, a sound she recognized, someone crying. Without thinking, she followed the sound to the half-open office door. The light was on. Through the narrow gap, she saw Alden sitting on the floor, his back against the desk, his head buried in his hands. His shoulders shook. Zelinda pushed the door open slowly. He didn't notice. She stepped inside, closing it softly behind her, and lowered herself to the floor beside him. She didn't say a word. She just sat there. After a moment, Alden lifted his head. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. He looked at her, and for a second, it seemed he might tell her to leave, but he didn't. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice raw and broken. "You weren't supposed to see this." "Everyone cries," Zelinda said, her tone calm but steady. "There's nothing wrong with that." Alden Sorrow let out a dry, humorless laugh, running both hands down his face. "I don't cry," he said quietly. "Haven't in years." "Then maybe it's about time," she replied, her voice carrying that simple kind of wisdom that cuts deeper than comfort. They sat in silence for a while. Alden's breathing steadied, his eyes unfocused, his body trying to remember how to relax. Zelinda didn't push. She just stayed there. "I had a son," Alden said suddenly, his voice breaking mid-sentence. "He died when he was 3. The air left Zelinda's lungs. She turned toward him, the pain etched into his face, almost unbearable to look at. "Alden," she began, but he shook his head. "Let me finish, please." He took a shaky breath. His name was Theo. He was perfect, always laughing, full of energy. He had his mother's eyes, his throat locked up, and Zelinda waited, silent, heart aching. "It was an accident," Alden continued, each word falling heavier than the last. "The nanny forgot to latch the pool gate. I was on a business call. His mother, Magali, was at a spa, and Theo thought he could swim." Zelinda covered her mouth, a sharp sound catching in her throat. "When we found him, it was already too late," Alden said, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "But they kept coming. They tried to revive him, but he was just so small." "I'm so sorry," Zelinda whispered. "I'm so sorry, Alden. Magali never forgave me, or herself. The marriage fell apart within months. She said it was my fault, that I should have been there, that I should have checked the gate, and she was right." He closed his eyes. "I should have been there." "No," Zelinda said firmly. "It wasn't your fault. It was an accident. A terrible one, but an accident. It was my life," he murmured. "I built this empire, this fortune, but I couldn't protect my own child. Zelinda hesitated for a moment, then reached out and touched his arm. Alden looked down at her hand, small, steady, human, and something inside him finally broke. He turned toward her and let her hold him. Zelinda wrapped her arms around him as he cried, the kind of crying that comes from deep within, raw and unfiltered, years of pain bursting free. She didn't say anything. Sometimes, silence is the only language that heals. When he finally calmed, it was already the middle of the night. Alden pulled away, embarrassed, but Zelinda just gave a small, soft smile. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "No need to thank me." He looked at her, really looked, and what he saw wasn't pity. It was understanding, recognition. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "That night, on the road, why did you stop?" Zelinda thought for a moment before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be on the ground," she said simply. "And when someone helps you up, you don't forget." Alden nodded. He didn't need more words. He understood. And there, on that cold office's floor, between tears and unspoken truths, something began to take shape. Something neither of them had expected. Not gratitude, not sympathy, but a fragile connection between two souls that had been broken and were, somehow, learning how to live again. When they finally stood, it was well past 3 in the morning. Alden walked her to her room. For the first time since they'd met, there was a hug, unplanned, unguarded, entirely human. "Thank you for listening," he said, still holding her. "Always," Zelinda whispered, and she meant it. When he turned to walk down the long hallway toward his own room, there was something lighter in his step, his shoulders less burdened, his breath easier, and as Zelinda closed her door, she felt it too, that something between them had shifted, something deep, something that scared her as much as it comforted her, because for the first time in a long time, neither of them was alone in their pain. The next morning brought a strange kind of light. Zelinda woke up to listener bouncing on the bed, sunlight flooding through the tall windows, the kind of brightness she'd never known in that tiny back room she used to call home. Real light. Warm light. When she went downstairs for breakfast, Alden was already on the veranda, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as she entered, and she noticed it instantly. He was different, the tension in his shoulders gone, his expression softer. "Good morning," he said, motioning to the chair beside him. "Coffee, please," she said, sitting down with listener on her lap, the little girl already reaching for a piece of bread. They ate in easy silence for a while. Listen, made a sticky mess with jam, and Alden, to Zelinda's surprise, actually smiled watching her lick her fingers. "I need to talk to you about something," Alden said finally, setting his tablet down. Zelinda's stomach tensed. Here it was, the part where he'd tell her she had to leave. "I have a proposal," he continued, his gaze steady, "and I want you to think carefully before you answer." "A proposal?" she asked, frowning. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, fingers interlaced. "For the next 6 months, I'll have to attend several social events, charity galas, ribbon cuttings, investor dinners. Having a companion is expected." Zelinda's pulse quickened. She already knew where this was going. "You want me to be your date?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. "Not like that," Alden said quickly. "This isn't romantic. It would be a professional arrangement. You'd accompany me to public events, maintain appearances, and, in return, I'd make sure you and listener are financially secure." "Maintain appearances," Zelinda repeated, skeptical. "I know how it sounds," Alden admitted, running a hand through his hair, "but it's not about control, it's about protection. Magali has been spreading stories, calling you an opportunist, saying you set everything up. If you stand by my side, if you show there's nothing to hide, people will stop digging. And why should I care what people think? Because they can destroy you," Alden said, his tone hardening. "I know how this world works. One bad headline, and you lose your job. another, and no one will hire you again. Within weeks, you'd be back where you started. Or worse. Zelinda bit her lip. She didn't want to admit it, but he was right. She'd seen the comments online. Gold digger, scammer, parasite. Words that hurt more than any slap could. And what exactly, she asked, steadying her voice, are you offering? Alden Sorrow picked up a leather folder from the chair beside him and slid it across the table. Zelinda opened it. Inside was a contract. Her eyes skimmed over the clauses. Monthly salary, housing included, full health coverage for her and listener, an education fund for the girl, and at the end of 6 months, a payout that could change their lives forever. This is... Zelinda's voice trailed off. It's fair, Alden said. So you'll be working, dealing with fake smiles, invasive questions, judgmental looks. It won't be easy, but I promise I'll protect you. Always. Zelinda looked at Lisyan Ha, who was busy folding and unfolding a napkin with deep concentration. Her mind flashed back to the freezing backroom she once called home. The endless double shifts, the bills that never balanced, the nights she went to bed hungry so her daughter wouldn't have to. Is there anything else? She asked quietly. Something not written down. Alden hesitated. There is, he admitted, taking a deep breath. I need you to trust me. I know that's asking a lot. We barely know each other, but I wouldn't offer this if I didn't believe you deserved better than what life's handed you so far. Something stirred in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something. Respect, maybe, or the recognition of another soul that had been broken and survived. I accept, she said. Relief flickered in his eyes, but on one condition, which is, I want to be treated like a partner, not an employee. If I am going to be by your side at these events, I need to understand what's happening. No secrets. Alden extended his hand. No secrets, he repeated. Zelinda took it, feeling the firmness of his grip. For the first time in years, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The following days, Alden kept his word. He hired a personal stylist named Faith Morales, a sophisticated woman who treated Zelinda not with condescension, but with genuine respect. Together, they picked outfits that made her feel powerful, not out of place, dresses that celebrated her figure without overexposing it, shoes elegant yet practical. There were etiquette lessons too, but not the humiliating kind. The instructor, Mrs. Mirza, was an elderly woman who taught with humor and patience. Zelinda learned about silverware, glassware, and the art of polite small talk, which, as it turned out, was a battlefield disguised as charm. And Alden was always there. Not controlling, but supportive. He'd host mock dinners where only the two of them practiced conversation and manners. He'd correct her gently when she slipped, and always with warmth. You're doing great, he said one evening, after a particularly challenging rehearsal. Better than I expected. You expected me to fail? Zelinda teased, raising an eyebrow. No, he smiled. I expected you to be good. You're exceptional. For the first time in years, Zelinda felt something she hadn't known in a long time. Pride. Their first public appearance was set for 2 weeks later, a charity gala for an early education foundation. Alden had chosen carefully, important, but not intimidating, the perfect stage to introduce her. A single mother, hardworking, passionate about education. They're going to love you, he said, though the flicker of worry in his eyes didn't go unnoticed. And if they don't? Alden reached for her hand, a gesture that had started to feel natural between them. Then they're fools, he said simply, and Zelinda believed him. The night of the gala arrived, carrying the kind of nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. Standing in front of the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. It was her, but not the version she'd known. The gown was a deep teal blue, elegant but modest, flowing in soft lines to her ankles. The fabric moved with her, not against her. The heels were medium heights, stylish yet comfortable. Her hair, usually tied back in a hurried bun, now fell in gentle waves over her shoulders, a few strands pinned to the side. But what stood out most were her eyes. Faith had insisted on makeup that enhanced rather than hid, a delicate eyeliner that made her gaze deeper, a rose-nude lipstick that gave her lips life without shouting for attention. "Oh my God," Zelinda whispered to herself. "Oh my God, doesn't even cover it," Faith said from behind her, beaming with pride. "You're breathtaking, honey." Zelinda turned, examining herself from every angle. For the first time, she didn't just feel pretty, she felt powerful, worthy of being in that world. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Can I come in?" It was Alden's voice. "Sure," she said, her pulse quickening for reasons she refused to name. The door opened, and Alden stepped in. He was immaculate, in a black tuxedo, his hair slicked back, beard neatly trimmed. But when his eyes met hers, he stopped in his tracks. For a long second, they just stared at each other. "You," he began, but his voice caught. He cleared his throat. "You look perfect." Zelinda blushed. "It's the dress," she said quickly. "No," Alden said, taking a few steps closer. "It's you. It's always been you." Faith, sensing the moment, slipped quietly out of the room and closed the door behind her. "I'm nervous," Zelinda admitted softly. "What if I mess up? What if I embarrass you?" Alden took her hands in his. "Impossible," he said, his voice low and steady. "Just be yourself. That's more than enough." She nodded, holding on to his words and his hands. Neither seemed ready to let go. "Shall we?" he asked finally, offering his arm. "Let's," she said, looping her arm through his. The ballroom was dazzling. Chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, scattering light like shards of crystal. Round tables draped in white linen were adorned with elaborate floral arrangements. A jazz band played softly in the background. Nearly 200 guests moved about, murmuring in polite conversation and clinking glasses. As Alden and Zelinda entered, a hush rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, eyes followed. Zelinda's instinct was to retreat, but Alden's hand tightened gently around her arm, steady, reassuring. "Breathe," he whispered. "You're the most beautiful woman in this room." And somehow Zelinda believed him. They were greeted by the event organizer, an elegant woman named Beatrice Langford, who hugged Alden warmly and extended a gracious hand to Zelinda, her smile genuine and kind. "So you're the famous Zelinda," Beatrice Langford said warmly, her eyes kind but curious. "Alden hasn't stopped talking about you." "Welcome." "Thank you," Zelinda replied, shaking her hand firmly, remembering Mrs. Mercer's lessons. Eye contact, firm grip, confidence, not aggression. "Come, let me introduce you to some people," Beatrice said, leading them through the glittering ballroom. The next few hours blurred into a whirl of faces, handshakes, and champagne smiles. Zelinda met CEOs, doctors, attorneys, philanthropists, the polished elite of New York society. Some greeted her with polite warmth. Others scanned her up and down with thinly veiled disdain. Still, she held her ground. She answered questions with honesty, but never overshared. She spoke about early education with genuine passion, mentioned leçons and the challenges of single motherhood, but without pity. She even made people laugh with stories from her old job at the diner, not self-deprecating, but disarming. And Alden was always nearby, not hovering, but present. He let her shine, only stepping in when someone crossed the line. Then it happened. During the keynote speech, Zelinda felt it, a sudden chill cutting through the air, like an invisible draft from the entrance. She turned, and there she was. Magali Fairmont, Alden's ex-fiancée, looked exactly like the magazine photos, tall, thin, her beauty sharp as glass. Her dress was blood red, sleek, and deliberately provocative. Her platinum hair fell perfectly straight down her back, and her icy blue eyes locked on Zelinda with venomous precision. Alden saw her too. His body stiffened beside Zelinda. "She shouldn't be here," he muttered. "But she is," Zelinda said quietly, steadying her breath even as her pulse hammered. Magali began to walk toward them, her stiletto heels echoing across the marble floor. The crowd parted instinctively. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone wanted to see the collision. She stopped in front of Alden, pretending not to notice Zelinda at all. "Alden," she purred, her voice honey over poison. "What a surprise to see you here. And with company, no less, Magali," Alden said evenly. "Didn't know you were on the guest list." "I wasn't." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "But I'm one of the Foundation's patrons. I go where I please." Finally she turned to Zelinda, her gaze slicing from head to toe, lingering like a surgeon inspecting a wound. "So you're the new companion." The pause before the word was intentional, loaded. Zelinda felt anger flare, but she held her expression steady. "Remember the lessons. Don't give her what she wants." "I'm Zelinda," she said, extending her hand politely. "Nice to meet you." Magali glanced at the hand as if it were contagious, and didn't take it. "How charming," she said, her tone dripping disdain. Alden always did have a soft spot for charity cases. Alden stepped forward, his eyes flashing. "Watch it, Magali." His voice was low, dangerous. But Zelinda placed a calming hand on his arm, gentle, firm. She looked at Magali, and in her eyes there was no fear. No fury, just pity. "That must be exhausting," Zelinda said quietly, carrying all that bitterness. "I hope one day you'll find peace." For a fraction of a second, Magali faltered. Her mask slipped, and behind the venom, Zelinda saw it. Pain, loss, emptiness. But then, just as quickly, the mask returned. "How touching," Magali said coolly. "Enjoy it while it lasts, darling. Men like Alden get bored of their charity projects." She turned on her heel and walked away, the red fabric of her dress trailing dramatically behind her. Zelinda exhaled. Alden slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her close. "You were incredible," he murmured, admiration in his tone. "How did you do that?" "Do what?" "Not let her get to you." Zelinda shrugged lightly. "She has no power over me," she said, and realized it was true. "I know who I am. That's enough." Alden looked at her, and something in his gaze changed. Warmer, deeper. It made Zelinda's heart skip. Before he could say another word, the music shifted, a slow waltz. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor. "Dance with me?" he asked, offering his hand. She hesitated. "I don't know how to waltz. I'll teach you." His smile, rare and unguarded, softened his entire face. "Trust me." Zelinda looked at his outstretched hand, and without another word, she took it. "I trust you." 3 months passed after that gala night. 3 months of events, business dinners, flights to other cities. With each passing day, Zelinda grew more comfortable in that world, the one that once felt unreachable. But more than that, she and Alden had grown close. Not in the way tabloids might twist it, but in quiet, honest ways. The way he asked about her day, and truly listened. The way he played with her before dinner, making her laugh until she hiccuped. The way they sometimes sat together late at night on the veranda, talking about everything and nothing. They hadn't crossed the line. No kisses, no declarations. But something undeniable pulsed beneath the surface, waiting. It was a sunny Saturday that changed everything. Alden had suggested a trip to the mall. Zelinda needed new clothes for listener, and to her surprise, he insisted on coming. Dressed casually in jeans and a white linen shirt, he looked lighter, younger, human. They were in the food court. Listener, happily devouring an ice cream, when a voice broke through the hum of conversation. "Zelinda." She froze. That voice. She'd heard it in her nightmares. Slowly, she turned. Standing just a few feet away was Ryan Hale, the man who had vanished when she was pregnant, draining her savings and leaving behind a pathetic note that said he wasn't ready to be a father. He looked worse now, thinner, unshaving, eyes bloodshot. But the same smile was there, the same charm that once fooled her. "Zelinda, thank God," Ryan said, stepping toward her. Alden moved instantly, positioning himself between them. His tone was ice. "And who are you?" Ryan's expression darkened with recognition and envy. "I'm her daughter's father. Who the hell are you?" "Someone who actually showed up," Alden said coldly. "What you never did." "Look, man, this isn't your business," Ryan snapped, trying to step around him. "Zelinda, I need to talk to you. It's important." Zelinda felt bile rise in her throat. Part of her wanted to scream, to ask where he had been when she spent sleepless nights alone, terrified about giving birth. Where he was when Listener came into the world, tiny and fragile, fighting to breathe in the neonatal IQ. Where he was when she worked double shifts, her body aching, just to keep food on the table. But another part, the newer, stronger part, just wanted him gone forever. "There's nothing to say," Zelinda said, her voice steady. She lifted Listener into her arms. The little girl kept licking her ice cream, blissfully unaware of the storm around her. "You lost that right. Zelinda, please," Ryan Hole said, his voice cracking with desperation. "I made a mistake, I know that, but I've changed. I want to meet my daughter. I want to be part of her life. Now." Zelinda let out a laugh, dry and sharp. "Now that she's older. Now that it's convenient for you." "That's not it," Ryan said, running a hand through his messy hair. "I was broke, okay? In debt. I wasn't ready. But now I've got a job, a place to live. I can help." "We don't need your help," Zelinda replied coldly. Ryan's gaze flicked from Alden to the high-end stores around them, then back to Zelinda, her elegant dress, her poise. His tone turned bitter. "Yeah, I can see that," he sneered. "You found yourself an upgrade. Someone with money. Must be nice, forgetting where you came from." Alden took a threatening step toward him. "Say that again," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Zelinda pressed a hand to Alden's chest, stopping him. "Don't," she said softly. "He's not worth it." Then she turned to Ryan. Her eyes were clear, unshaken. "You want the truth," she said. "I did forget where I came from. Because where I came from was pain, abandonment, nights crying alone, wondering what I did wrong. And you know what I learned? Nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. You did." Her voice grew stronger. "And him," she gestured toward Alden, "he saved me. Not with money, with presence, with respect, with the reminder that my daughter and I deserve more than crumbs from someone who only shows up when it's convenient." Ryan's mouth opened, but Zelinda wasn't finished. "You want to meet your daughter, be part of her life." She held Listen tighter against her chest. "Then get a lawyer. File for a paternity test. Put your name on her paperwork. Take responsibility like a man. Until then, get out of my way." And she walked past him, head high, Alden beside her. Ryan stood frozen, mouth hanging open, words gone. Zelinda didn't look back. Only when they reached the car, when Listener was buckled safely in her car seat, did her hands start to tremble. The adrenaline drained, leaving her shaking in the silence that followed. Alden sat beside her, hand on the wheel but unmoving. He looked at her gently. "You okay?" Zelinda nodded, but tears spilled anyway. "Not sadness, release, freedom. I've never done that before," she whispered, wiping her cheeks. "I never stood up to him. I was always too scared." "You were never scared," Alden said firmly. "You did what you had to do to survive. But today you didn't just survive. You lived, and you were extraordinary." Zelinda looked at him, and something broke open inside her. The walls she had built, the armor she had carried, gone. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." Alden reached up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with the gentlest touch. "No need to thank me," he said softly. "I just want you to be happy." Their eyes locked, the space between them shrinking, the air charged. Zelinda's heart pounded so hard she swore he could hear it. "And then, Mummy? Ice cream's gone?" Lisenia's little voice shouted from the back seat. The moment shattered. They both laughed, tension dissolving into something warm, familiar. Alden started the car. "Let's go home," he said. And for the first time in years, Zelinda realized she actually had one. Night settled gently over the mansion. Lisenha had fallen asleep early, worn out from the day. Zelinda tucked her into the crib, kissed her forehead, her chest still fluttering from everything that had happened. When she went downstairs, she found Alden in the kitchen, cooking something on the stove. He had changed into a grey t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, hair slightly tousled. It was the most human she'd ever seen him. "What are you doing?" she asked, stepping closer. "Spaghetti carbonara," he said, stirring a pan. "My grandmother's recipe." "Comfort food. You cook?" she asked, surprised. "When I feel like it." He smiled faintly. "Most people don't know, but I spent half my childhood in her kitchen. It was my safe place." Zelinda sat on one of the stools by the counter, watching him move. There was something hypnotic about it, the calm precision, the quiet rhythm. "You never talk about your family," she said after a while. Alden paused, wooden spoons suspended in the air. "Not much to talk about," he said, stirring again. "My mom died when I was a teenager. Cancer. My dad was never really around." "And Bartholomew Grant?" Zelinda asked softly. She saw his shoulders tense. "How do you know that name?" His voice sharpened. "I heard Magali mention him at that dinner. She said something about," Zelinda hesitated, "about him destroying your family." Alden turned off the stove. For a long moment, he didn't move, just leaned against the counter, his head bowed. "Bartholomew Grant was my family's attorney," he said at last, voice low. "When my mum got sick, he offered to handle our affairs. When my father coped. During that time, he stole from us, bit by bit, transferred assets, emptied accounts, forged documents." Zelinda's stomach twisted. "By the time we found out, it was too late," Alden continued, finally turning to face her. There was an old pain in his eyes, the kind that never fully heals. "My mother died believing we still had something left, but he'd taken everything, almost everything. How did you get it back?" "It took years, lawsuits, work. I rebuilt everything from scraps. And when I finally proved what he'd done, he'd already fled the country, untouchable." He closed his eyes, jaw tight. "I swore he'd pay, that I'd destroy everything he ever built, just like he did to me." Zelinda stepped closer, her hand resting gently on his arm. "Hate is a heavy thing to carry," she said softly. "I know," Alden murmured, looking down at her. "But sometimes it's the only thing that keeps me alive." "No," Zelinda said firmly. "What keeps you alive isn't hate, it's hope. It's the kindness that's still in you, even after everything. It's the way you play with Listen, the way you treated me with respect that night on the road, when you could have just driven past." Alden looked at her, something breaking behind his eyes. "The walls, the armor, all of it. How do you do that?" he asked hoarsely. "How do you see good in me when I can't see it myself?" "Because it's there," Zelinda said, her hand still on his arm. "You just have to let someone see it." Alden lifted his hand, his fingers brushing her cheek, the lightest touch, but she felt it everywhere. Every cell in her body woke to it. "Zelinda," he began, but she shook her head. "Don't think," she whispered. "Just feel." And then there was no distance between them. Alden leaned in, Zelinda rose on her toes, and their lips met halfway. The kiss started soft, cautious, as if they were testing something fragile. Then it deepened, Alden's hands cupping her face, Zelinda clutching his shirt, pulling him closer. It was nothing like any kiss Zelinda had ever known. It wasn't about desire, it was about release, about two broken souls finding home in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Both were breathless. Alden rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. "I didn't plan this," he said quietly. "I promised I'd keep things professional, that I wouldn't complicate things." "Too late," Zelinda murmured with a faint smile. "They're already complicated." Alden laughed, low, genuine, unguarded. "Yeah, complicated. For a while, they just stayed there, the air thick with everything they didn't need to say." Then Alden stood, grabbed 2 plates, and served the carbonara. "Come on," he said, "before it gets cold." They ate at the kitchen table instead of the formal dining room. Under the soft light, they talked about everything and nothing. Zelinda told him about growing up in a small town, raised by her grandmother after her mother died, giving birth to a second child who didn't survive. Alden spoke about summers at his grandmother's farmhouse before life fell apart. "Did you ever want something different?" Alden asked, wiping his plate with a piece of bread. "Like college, a career?" Zelinda paused, fork midder. "Always," she admitted. "I wanted to study early childhood education, work with kids. But when Lisan Ha was born, that dream kind of disappeared. And now, she shrugged, "now I have a daughter to raise. That's what matters." "What if you could have both?" She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I've got connections at several universities," Alden said, leaning forward. "I could get you a spot, full scholarship, and with childcare here, you wouldn't have to worry about Lisan here. You could study." "Alden," she started, but he raised his hand. "This isn't charity. It's an investment in you, because I believe you can do incredible things, and because—" he hesitated, eyes softening, "because I want to see you happy, completely happy." Tears stung her eyes. "Why do you do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why do you care so much?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you reminded me that goodness still exists," he said simply. "Because when I was at my lowest, you didn't keep driving. You stopped. And that changed everything." He reached across the table. She took his hand. Their fingers intertwined, the rest of the world fading to nothing. Zelinda broke the silence first. "I'm scared," she whispered, "of getting used to this, to you, and then losing it all again." "I'm scared too," Alden admitted, "of not being enough, of failing you, of repeating my past mistakes." "Then we'll be scared together," Zelinda said. There was quiet strength in those words. Alden smiled softly. "Together," he repeated. Later that night, Alden walked her to her room. They stood at the doorway, neither wanting to move. "Good night," Zelinda said, but didn't step away. "Good night," Alden echoed, also unmoving. Then he leaned in and kissed her again. Gentle, tender, a promise more than a moment. When they parted, she slipped into the room and closed the door softly behind her. Leaning against it, her heart racing, a foolish smile tugged at her lips. On the other side, Alden did the same, head against the wood, eyes closed, smiling. That night, both slept better than they had in years. But neither knew that something was coming, something that would shatter the peace they'd found. A truth buried for decades was about to surface. And when it did, it would test everything they'd built, because Zelinda carried a secret in her blood, one that tied her to the man Alden hated most in the world, and that secret was about to be uncovered. The letter arrived on a rainy Monday morning. Zelinda grabbed it from the mailbox, without thinking, just another envelope in a pile of bills. But when she saw the sender, her heart froze. Grant and Associates Law Offices. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a legal document, a delayed acknowledgement of paternity. Bartholomew Grant, the man Alden had despised all his life, was declaring himself her father. Zelinda read the document once, twice, then again. It made no sense. Her mother had never mentioned a name. Her grandmother only ever said he was an important man who had another family, but never who, never details. And now here it was, in official print, signed and sealed. She sank onto the porch steps, rain tapping on the roof, the world spinning around her. She was Bartholomew Grant's daughter, the man who had ruined Alden's family, the man Alden had sworn to destroy. Zelinda. She looked up. Alden stood in the doorway, concern etched across his face. What's wrong? You're pale. Zelinda handed him the letter. Unable to speak, he took it, eyes scanning the lines. Then she saw it. The shift, the way his expression hardened, how his jaw clenched. This, he began, his voice faltering. Read again, disbelief deepening. You're his daughter? I didn't know, Zelinda said, rising on shaky legs. I swear, Alden, I didn't know. Alden took a step back, the letter still in his hand. Grant, he said, spitting the name like poison. You're a Grant. No, Zelinda said sharply, shaking her head. I'm a Mora. I've always been. That man was never a father to me. I didn't even know he existed until now. But his blood runs through your veins, Alden said, almost to himself. All this time, was it all some setup? The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. How can you say that? Her voice trembled. How can you even think I'd planned something like this? I don't know what to think anymore, Alden snapped, running his hands through his hair. Out of nowhere he claims you as his daughter. After all these years, right when you're in my life? That's not a coincidence. It wasn't out of nowhere. Zelinda's voice rose. He probably saw my face in some article, standing next to you, and decided to use that, but I didn't know. I never asked for this. Alden fell silent, jaw tight. She could see the wall behind his eyes, trust fighting against a lifetime of bitterness. I need time, he said finally, his tone cold. I need to process this. Alden, please. Zelinda stepped forward, but he stepped back. That single movement hurt more than any word could. Just give me space. He turned and walked it away, leaving her standing in the rain. The days that followed were a quiet kind of hell. Alden barely left his office. When he did, he spoke to her with cold politeness, professional, detached, as if the last few months hadn't happened, as if that kiss hadn't happened. Zelinda tried talking to him more than once, but he always had an excuse, a meeting, a call, more work. The one who suffered most was listener. The little girl had grown used to Alden's presence. She called for him, looked for him, and when he didn't come, she cried until she couldn't anymore. Where's Uncle Alden? She asked every night. He's working, sweethearts, Zelinda would answer, her heart breaking a little more each time. A week later, another letter arrived, this time from the university. She'd been accepted, full scholarship, to the early childhood education program. Classes started in a month. She should have been thrilled. It was everything she'd ever wanted, but without Alden it felt hollow. That afternoon, Beatrice, the woman who had organized the charity gala and become like family to her, showed up at the mansion, elegant as always, teacup in hand. Did he tell you? Beatrice asked. Tell me what? About the investigation he started. On Grant. Zelinda's stomach twisted. What investigation? Beatrice sighed. He hired private investigators. They're digging into all of Bartholomew Grant's records. Business deals, associates, everything. He's obsessed, Zelinda. Because of me, Zelinda whispered. No, Beatrice said gently, setting her cup down. Because of him. Because of the hatred he's carried for so long. But now you're part of it, and he doesn't know how to separate one from the other. What should I do? Beatrice took her hands. Live your life, go to school, chase your dreams. Sitting here waiting for him to decide whether he trusts you or not, it'll destroy you. But I love him, Zelinda blurted out, before she could stop herself. And when she said it, she realized it was true. I know, Beatrice said softly, a sad smile on her lips. But sometimes, loving someone means letting them fight their own demons, while you fight yours. That night, Zelinda made her choice. She knocked on Alden's office door. It took him a while, but he opened it, looking tired, unshaven, worn. I'm leaving, Zelinda said plainly. I got into college. I'm renting an apartment near campus. Me and Lisonga were starting over. Something flickered across his face. Pain. Relief. She couldn't tell. Okay, he said simply. Okay. Her voice broke. That's all you have to say. Alden closed his eyes. What do you want me to say, Zelinda? That you trust me, she cried. That you know I had nothing to do with this. That what we have is bigger than the hate you feel for a man I've never even met. I don't know if I can, he said, eyes filled with anguish. I don't know if I can separate you from him, and that's not fair to you. You don't deserve that. No, she said quietly, tears streaming now. I don't. I deserve someone who actually sees me, not the last name I never asked for. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Zelinda. She glanced over her shoulder. I'll miss you, he said, his voice breaking. Every single day. Then come find me, she said softly. When you finally learn to tell hate from love. When you can really see me. Come find me. And she left, closing the door gently behind her. 3 days later, Zelinda and Listen, I moved into a small apartment near the university. It was modest, nothing like the mansion, but it was theirs. That first night, after putting Lisanha to bed, Zelinda sat by the window, looking out at the glowing city skyline, and she cried, for the love she had, for the love she lost, for the love she still carried. But when the sun rose, she wiped her tears, because there was life ahead, a degree to earn, a daughter to raise, and she would do it, with or without Alden. Because Zelinda Mura had learned one thing: she didn't need anyone to save her. She could save herself. 2.5 years later, the university auditorium buzzed with life. Graduates in black gowns and caps, families with flowers and cameras, the air thick with pride and joy. Backstage, Zelinda adjusted her cap for the 10th time, heart pounding. Mum, stop fussing. Listen here, now 4.5, tugged her hand. The little girl looked radiant in a blue dress and a flower crown. Sorry, honey, Zelinda smiled, kneeling to her daughter's height. Mum's just nervous. You're gonna be the best one, Listener said, with the absolute certainty only a child can have. Beatrice appeared then, elegant as always, holding a bouquet. Ready? She asked, her eyes shining with pride. Ready, Zelinda said, and for once she meant it. The past 2 years had changed everything. Zelinda hadn't just graduated, she'd graduated at the top of her class, chosen as valedictorian. Her project on early childhood education in underprivileged communities had won awards, drawn attention from non-profits and even government programs. She'd become a name people respected, but more than that, she'd become herself. No longer the woman who needed saving, the woman who saved, who inspired, who built. As for Alden, she tried not to think about him, but every day she still did, wondering where he was, what he was doing, and whether he ever thought of her too. In the first few months after the breakup, he had tried reaching out a few times, short messages, simple requests to talk, but Zelinda had stayed firm. She'd said everything she needed to say. Now it was up to him. Eventually, the messages stopped, and life went on. It's time, the event coordinator called. Zelinda took a deep breath, squeezed Lisinia's little hand, and walked toward the stage. The ceremony was beautiful, emotional speeches, laughter, and tears. And when they called her name, when Zelinda walked across the stage to receive her diploma, the applause was thunderous. She scanned the crowd, saw Beatrice standing, clapping through tears. She spotted classmates, professors, even Mrs. Sada, her old landlady, who had driven hours just to be there. And then, at the very back of the auditorium, she saw him, Alden. The world stopped. The noise faded. It was just him, standing by the door in a dark suit, his hair a little longer now, beard neatly trimmed, and in his eyes, that same intensity she remembered so well. Zelinda almost stumbled but caught herself. She accepted her diploma, thanked the dean, and stepped off the stage, her legs trembling. When the ceremony ended, as people spilled into the courtyard for pictures and congratulations, she searched for him, but Alden was gone. "Mum, picture," Lisanna called, tugging at her hand and pointing to a blooming tree. Zelinda forced a smile, posing for photos, chatting with people, accepting hugs and congratulations. But her thoughts were miles away. Then Beatrice appeared, an envelope in her hand. "He asked me to give you this," she said quietly. Zelinda took it, her hands shaking. Inside was a simple card and an invitation. The card read, "You told me to come find you when I could finally tell hate from love. It took too long, but I've finally learnt. Now I just want you to know, I see you. I always have, and I always will." The invitation was for the grand opening of a new education center in a low-income neighborhood. Date, 3 days from now. At the bottom, one final line. "Built in honor of someone who taught me that the greatest wealth is changing lives." Tears streamed down Zelinda's face. 3 days later, Zelinda parked in front of the address from the invitation. The building was new, modern, yet warm, with colorful walls and a garden where children were already playing. Lisanna leapt out of the car, running toward the playground. Zelinda followed slowly, her heart racing. At the entrance, a plaque read, "The Theo Sorrow Learning Center, a place where every child is seen, valued, and loved." Zelinda covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes again. He had named it after his son, not out of grief, but out of love. "Do you like it?" She turned. Alden stood there, hands in his pockets, a nervous smile on his lips. "Alden," she managed to whisper. "I had to do something good," he said, stepping closer. "Something that honored Theo and honored you. Because you're the one who showed me that holding on to hate only destroys you, that I could choose better." "The whole thing with Grant," Zelinda began, but he shook his head. "It doesn't matter anymore. I saw justice done, legally, not through revenge. And as for you," he paused in front of her, voice low, "you were never part of that darkness. I always knew it. I was just too scared to get hurt again, so I pushed you away. Biggest mistake of my life." Zelinda looked at him, really looked, and saw it. The sincerity, the vulnerability. "You left me," she said quietly, the pain still raw, "when I needed you to believe in me most. I know." Alden's gaze didn't waver. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it, if you'll let me." "Alden, wait," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box. "I'm not asking for a yes right now," he said, opening it. Inside was a simple, beautiful ring. "I'm just asking for a chance to do things right this time, to date you, to earn your trust again, to prove I've changed." Zelinda stared at the ring, then at him. "And if I say no, then I'll wait," Alden said without hesitation. "As long as it takes, because you're worth it. You've always been worth it." Everything she'd held back over the past 2 years, the pain, the strength, the acceptance, surged within her. "I'm not the same woman you found on that road," she said softly. "I don't need saving anymore." "I know," Alden said with a gentle smile, "and that's exactly why I love you. Not because you need me, but because I need you. Because you make me want to be better and Mom." Lisanna came running toward them, stopping beside Zelinda. She looked up at Alden, and her face lit up. "Uncle Alden." Alden knelt, arms open, and listened. He threw herself into them. He held her tight, eyes closing for a moment. "I missed you, little one," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I missed you too." She pulled back, looking at him seriously. "Are you staying now?" Alden looked at Zelinda. "If your mum says yes, listen." A turn to her mother, eyes wide and hopeful. Zelinda took a deep breath. She thought of everything, the heartbreak, the healing, the lessons, and she realized that holding on to resentment would only betray the woman she'd become. "All right," she said at last, but slow, carefully. and with complete honesty. Alden's smile spread like sunrise. "Slow," he agreed. "And to be completely honest, I love you. Always have. Always will." Jalinda's own smile bloomed. Genuine, unguarded. "I love you too," she said, and it was the purest truth she'd ever spoken. Alden stood, and they just looked at each other, with listen, her between them. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There was no cinematic kiss. Not yet, but it was better. It was real. It was honest. It was the beginning of something built not on rescue, but on choice. 6 months later, the official grand opening of the Theo Sorreau Learning Center was in full swing. Dozens of children ran around laughing. Parents chatted happily. Teachers showed off bright new classrooms. On a small stage, Zalinda spoke to the crowd about the power of accessible education. From the corner, Alden watched her with quiet pride. Beside him, listener sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching in a notebook, tongue poking out in concentration. When Zalinda stepped off the stage, she walked straight to them. Alden wrapped an arm around her, kissing the top of her head. "You're amazing," he murmured. "We were amazing," she corrected, looking round the bustling center. "This exists because we believed in it, together." They had built it side by side, Alden with his resources, Zalinda with her vision. It was a shared dream, an equal partnership, and it worked. It was theirs, and it was just the beginning. "I've got something for you," Alden said, pulling a familiar small box from his pocket. Zalinda laughed. "Again?" "Again," he confirmed, opening it. "Only this time, I'm actually asking for real. Zalinda Mura, will you marry me?" Zalinda looked at the ring, then at him, then at listener, who had stopped coloring and was watching with wide, hopeful eyes. "Yes," she said simply. 1,000 times yes. Alden slipped the ring onto her finger, and this time there was a kiss. Deep, promising, full of everything they'd fought for, and everything still to come. When they finally broke apart, "Listen," her clapped excitedly, and several people around them joined in. Zalinda laughed, her cheeks flushed, happiness radiating from her like sunlight. "I love you," Alden murmured against her lips. "I love you more," she whispered back. "Impossible," he said, smiling. And there, surrounded by laughing children, by the work that was changing lives, and by the family they had chosen to build, Zalinda and Alden finally found what they had been searching for all along. Not a savior, not a victim, but partners, equals, whole together, yet complete on their own. And that was more than any fairy tale could ever promise. That was real. That was love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications to receive more true stories every day. And tell us, what would you do in the millionaire's place? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share this story with someone who needs to believe in second chances.